Welcome to this explainer. Look, I know so many of you watching right now are just right in the thick of it. And honestly, the healing journey can be absolutely exhausting. You've been working on yourself, analyzing your patterns, taking 2 steps forward and, well, 1 step back, just trying your absolute hardest to move forward. But sometimes, the sheer relentless effort of it all just feels incredibly heavy. I see that exhaustion, I really do. I know that weight, and I want you to know you're in exactly the right place today. Okay, let's dive into this. So, let me ask you, are you tired of resisting your own growth? The sources we're unpacking today describe a very specific kind of emotional exhaustion. It's this profound heaviness of running. Our texts note that we often run through endless distractions. We run through relationships, we run through fear, and we run by just surrounding ourselves with constant noise. We'll do almost anything to avoid sitting still long enough to face the potential that's been placed inside us. The texts actually use the ancient story of Jonah to illustrate this. They point out a brilliant insight. Jonah didn't run because he lacked intelligence. No, he ran because vision felt incredibly uncomfortable. He was terrified of what he was being asked to step into. But eventually, the running becomes heavier and far more exhausting than just facing it.
Moving into Section 1, The Overgrown Garden, Survival Mechanisms and Deep Roots.
And this brilliantly illustrates how we should view our inner lives. I want you to think of your mind and your heart as a garden. And like any garden, it needs patient tending, right? Not harsh judgment. Over time, certain thoughts, habits, and reactions take root in this space. Now, these weren't planted maliciously. As our text explained, they were survival mechanisms. They came from pain, from rejection, or from seasons where you simply had to emotionally protect yourself just to keep going. In fact, neuroscience tells us our brains actively wire these survival behaviors into strong neural pathways because, well, at one point they kept us safe. But after a while, those defensive mechanisms grow deep, tangled roots. This brings us to a core spiritual framework highlighted in our sources, the contrast between external success and internal healing. Our texts emphasize that God, or the profound process of spiritual growth, prioritizes healing the heart internally first. Why? Because external success means literally nothing if your inner world is still drowning in fear, confusion, or resentment. The text references passages like Romans 12:2, noting we must be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Healing has to start internally, changing how your spirit literally breathes, before it can genuinely and sustainably show up on the outside.
Now, you might be thinking of the loud, obvious weeds in our internal garden. Things like explosive anger, deep bitterness, or destructive habits. But let's talk about the quiet weeds. Things like always expecting disappointment, believing you are unworthy of love, assuming every good thing will inevitably leave you, living in a constant state of survival mode, holding on to absolute control because trust just feels entirely too unsafe. While the obvious weeds are easy to spot and pull, it's these quiet, insidious survival mechanisms that actually do the most damage. Think of them like creeping, invasive vines in a garden. They don't look overly dangerous at first glance, do they? But beneath the surface, they subtly steal the nutrients, the water, and the sunlight from your authentic self. When the heart is crowded with this kind of quiet fear and internal noise, it becomes incredibly hard to recognize peace when it finally arrives.
All right, on to Section 2, Pulling the Deep Roots, the Pain of Pruning.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it brings us to the messy, fundamentally uncomfortable part of our explainer today. Weeding out unhealthy things is difficult precisely because those harmful patterns actually feel familiar to us. They feel like home. You might hold on to control because vulnerability once completely broke you. Or you might hold on to fear because fear once helped you survive a terrible environment. But to experience what is better, we have to endure the deeply uncomfortable work of pulling up the very things that once kept us safe. In actual botany, turning the soil is a messy, disruptive process. It uproots everything. But it's absolutely crucial because it introduces necessary oxygen deep into the earth. Your emotional soil is the exact same way. That disruption brings life. It's exactly why healing often feels like gardening before it feels like peace. So when you feel that discomfort, that emotional dirt under your fingernails, it is not a sign of failure. You aren't doing it wrong. It is simply the necessary, messy process of preparing the soil of your heart. You are being shown what needs to be weeded out, not to shame you, but to make room for something far healthier.
This brings us to the concept of pruning, an idea our texts trace all the way back to the ancient teachings in John 15. Now, pruning sounds painful at first because it literally involves cutting things away. But if you talk to any master arborist, they will tell you that pruning a tree is never an act of violence or punishment.
When an arborist cuts away a branch, they are intentionally redirecting the tree's energy and resources away from dead or dying wood and sending it straight toward new, healthy growth. So the crucial point here is that when familiar habits, toxic relationships, or comforting distractions are removed from your life, it is not a penalty, it is loving preparation. Some things just have to be removed so that peace can grow instead of panic, wisdom can grow instead of impulse, and trust can grow instead of constant anxiety. That leads us perfectly into Section 3, Loving Your Unfinished Garden, the Art of Not Abandoning Yourself. But how exactly do we treat ourselves while all this messy pruning is happening? Well, we need to talk about the sunlight and water of our inner garden, self-compassion. Specifically, our sources call this the sacred art of not abandoning yourself during the unfinished, muddy middle of your healing journey. Our texts point out a profound truth. Real self-love often begins in unfinished places. See, in our modern culture, we are so deeply conditioned to value ourselves based entirely on performance instead of presence. We honestly believe we can only love ourselves after the glow-up, after the success, after the perfect relationship arrives, or after all our character flaws are perfectly fixed. But true growth does not always look beautiful or put together while it's happening. Sometimes growth looks like resting more. Sometimes it looks like crying more, setting a firm boundary, or pulling away from distractions to just sit in the quiet. The truth is, you do not have to wait for the finish line to be worthy of your own love. Here's how our sources suggest we practice that gentle acceptance in our daily lives. First is honest assessment without giving up. You have to acknowledge exactly where you are emotionally, without layering shame on top of it. Shame doesn't motivate, it just keeps you disconnected from yourself. Second, you have to stop the harsh inner voice. Just think about it. How often do you speak to yourself in a way you would never, ever speak to a friend? Many of us survived environments where harsh criticism was normal, so our inner voice adopted that tone just to keep us in line. But love transforms a person entirely differently than fear does. True love corrects without destroying. And third is extending gentleness to yourself. Please hear this. Your intrinsic value is not suspended while you heal. You are still completely, entirely worthy while you are rebuilding. I want you to take a deep breath right now. You deserve gentleness too. Give yourself permission today, right in this very moment, to stop the relentless internal attacks. That incredible compassion, patience, and grace you so easily and freely hand out to everyone else in your life, the grace you give your friends, your family, even absolute strangers, you need to learn how to extend that exact same grace toward the person in the mirror. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds, making room for vision, the seed underground. When we finally do the hard work to clear the weeds, stop the harsh inner voice, and practice gentleness, we create space. And underneath all that cleared, newly oxygenated soil, a new seed is getting ready to break through. When you remove what no longer belongs, you slowly stop identifying with the broken things that once controlled you. But let's be totally honest, vision can be utterly terrifying, because vision requires change, exposure, growth, responsibility, and deep trust. A lot of people think they are just procrastinating a task or feeling lazy, but really, they are running from what the vision is asking them to become. We run because vision forces us to confront ourselves, our deep insecurities, our fear of failure, and strangely enough, our fear of success. In nature, a seed requires absolute darkness and the heavy weight of the soil to finally crack open and sprout. It is genuinely scary to be in the dark, and it is scary to outgrow the safe, familiar version of who we were. But once you stop running, hope begins growing again. Slowly, just like that seed underground. You start replacing the loud lies of the overgrown garden with quiet, unshakable truth. First, I am not abandoned. Even in the painfully quiet, lonely waiting seasons where you felt entirely disconnected and forgotten, you were seen. The universe, God, the process of spiritual growth. It doesn't just hand you a vision. It actively, lovingly develops the person required to carry it. And you must also realize, I am not beyond healing. No matter how deep the roots of those old survival mechanisms went, no matter how many years you spent reacting out of pain, your life is not permanently limited to what hurt you. You do not have to stay emotionally trapped in that old version of your story. The soil is actively being renewed. Your spirit is learning how to breathe differently, taking in that brand new oxygen. Finally, you must embrace the truth that peace is possible for me. All those excruciating waiting seasons, the deep confusion, the agonizing delays, none of it was wasted. Our sources refer to this concept using the ancient Greek word dunamis.
It doesn't just mean explosive outward power. It refers to the deep inner strength to become, the quiet fortitude required to transform. You were being strengthened in the dark to carry a weight of glory that once would have completely crushed you. This messy, healing, questioning version of you will ultimately become a living, breathing proof that you survived.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought today. The turning point in your garden happens when you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and you finally start asking, "What if this is exactly why I survived?" What if the vision you've been running from, the vision you feared, is the very thing connected to your ultimate freedom? What if that persistent, quiet calling isn't there to pressure you, but because purpose recognizes your name, even when you try your absolute hardest to hide from it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Tend to your garden today. Please be exceptionally gentle with yourselves in the unfinished places, and I'll see you next time.